So this was like a quick example, but we do work across different industries, different kinds of problems. So it can be something as simple as profitability, to entering a new market, to a merger and acquisition. Like there are a lot of different types of cases that we do. And the real reason why consulting is a very attractive proposition, especially for someone graduating right out of college, is that it gives you an exposure to a multiple number of industries and also helps you understand different aspects of a business. So you can be working with a sales team, you can be working with a cost reduction team, you can be working with the corporate finance team. So uh, that is very helpful in that way. I also see a very quick question here on difference between marketing and consulting. So in consulting, you can be solving a marketing problem for a client, but consulting is a slightly broader bucket where you solve not only marketing problems, but you can be solving a cost reduction problem for them. You can be starting a new business for them and those kind of things as well. Whereas in marketing, you will only be doing that function. So marketing as a function is something that we also do in consulting. So that is the difference. And so this is quickly about consulting and what we do. And in terms of my day-to-day job, what we do is we do a lot of problem solving. So by problem solving, I mean is that we get a lot of data from our clients. So we do different types of analysis to understand and dive deeper into a problem. So we do a lot of quantitative modeling, quantitative analysis. We also do a lot of qualitative research, which involves actually going to the market, speaking to consumers, doing like different consumer surveys as well if that is required. So the main part of the job is doing a lot of quantitative and qualitative analysis to actually try and deep dive and understand the problem. And then there is a huge section wherein we try and identify best practices by benchmarking with different companies, by talking to different experts in the industries, and also a lot of creative solutions that we might want to propose to the client. So it is a very client heavy job, which is you interact a lot with different folks at your client. So you can be interacting with right from the CEO to the person working in the lowest level at the factory also. So you might be required to handle like that wide variety of clients. So, in terms of the skills that you require, I think the only thing that you require in consulting is just the knack to learn things very quickly. So, as I said, since you're working in different industries and you're going to be working with clients who have spent their lives in those industries, you need to be able to give them recommendations about their industry. So, it's very important for you to be able to understand that industry inside out within like the first couple of weeks of the case, and then go to a person who's worked say for 30 years in that industry and then go and give a recommendation to him. So I think the most important part is just an aptitude that you might have to pick new things very quickly and have a very steep learning curve. That's one. Second is you need to develop a strong communication skill set, which involves not only verbal communication and presentation, but also requires you to be able to interact with a client on a day-to-day basis and make sure that the client is helping you out in solving the problem. And it also involves a lot of written communication because most of consulting is done through presentations and things like that. So something that you can develop is also how to communicate effectively in a top-down manner across written and verbal forms. So I think these are the broad skill sets that you require in consulting. And if we can probably just stop for a quick few questions and then we can go deeper into the guesstimate piece. So I see a question that says, is it true that consultants don't have specialization in any particular segment? So initially, yes. So the way it works is that at a consulting firm, you will do different projects in different industries. So you get a flavor of everything. And after a stage, which is say after you spend like 3-4 years at a firm, you get the choice to start specializing in a particular function, which you might say you want to do like a lot of work in operations field, or you might want to do work in only cement or industrial goods. So the specialization aspect kicks in after like 3-4 years, but until then you are pretty much free to do everything around the table. Uh, the next question is, did you get placed at BCG directly from campus? Yes, I got placed from campus directly. BCG comes to the SRCC campus, and the next question is, what do the HRs of MBB look in a candidate on their CV? So I will very quickly do this because this is a whole other discussion that we can get into. So the HRs of an MBB primarily look at you need to be academically sound. So good grades is very important. Number one. Number two is they look for different leadership skills. So they also see what levels of positions of responsibility you've held in different, say, societies and college, because that's something that's a lot of DU students spend their time in. So those kind of things. Then they also look at the internships that you've done. So internships at good, like reputed brands and with where you require a similar skill set, which is a lot of problem solving, etc. So that is something that they also look at. And like there is no set fit formula. You need to eventually be who you are. But these are some of the things that if you want to build a profile, you should focus on good academics, good leadership positions in societies, and trying and getting good internships. Something that worked really well for me was the fact that I'd taken part in a lot of case study competitions because that was something that really interested me. So if that's something you really like, you should try and try and do a lot of case competitions and over index on that as well. And apart from that, extracurriculars is also very, very helpful. So if you're really good at, say, if you're a national level basketball player or a sports person or a musician, these kind of things also add a lot of value to your profile. So how do we develop the know-how of an industry in a couple of, sorry, I think I missed one question. What are the cons of consulting? So the cons of consulting, I think the biggest con is just the work life, which is that we pretty much work, I think, 14 to 16-hour days during the weekdays, and we are piled with weekend work as well. And the second con of consulting, which maybe it doesn't hold true now in the COVID situation, is that we have to travel a lot. So we spend Monday to Friday at the client site and then fly on Monday morning to the client and fly back home on Friday evening. So these are, I think, the biggest two cons of consulting for me. Third, like a lot of people said, is that you might not be able to go deep into an industry and those kind of things because you are more of a generalist and you're helping out different clients. So you're not really driving something on the ground. So I think these are the three cons of consulting for me. Is it important to know coding languages? Not at all. I don't think consulting companies expect you to know anything for that matter. Like even Excel, PPT, etc. is taught on the job in the first few weeks, so you don't really have to know anything as such. Then the next question is, how do you develop a know-how of an industry in a couple of weeks, which is comparable to an industry leader? So one is definitely a lot of reading that we do. We have access to a lot of material that we try and read and get up to speed on that industry. Second is we have this in-house. We speak to a lot of experts of this industry, so we try and speak to CEOs of the industries of the big companies that we're working in. We try and do that, and we also try and leverage our clients as much as we can initially and get a lot of data and information and understanding about the industry. The only difference is that since we have an outside in perspective, the way we think of the client's problem is very different from how they might approach it, which is why they even hire consultants in the first place. Uh, so I'm just going to take a couple of questions and then jump into the guesstimate section, and maybe we can do more of these questions offline. Like, more happy to help. So someone's asked me about engineers in consulting. I don't think, in fact, consulting firms not only hire engineers, they hire engineers, commerce graduates, art students, and some are even hiring doctors for that matter. Because the more the variety in the way people think, the better it is for a consulting firm, because that's what you tend to do, and like it's very interesting to have different perspective. So I don't think it is hard for an engineer to become a consultant, and it does not matter whether you're an engineer or a commerce student. You end up working on similar cases and solving similar problems. Okay. So
Ritvik,
I'm going to quickly, yeah.
Your
Yeah,
your
go ahead.
experience and your yes, it was really insightful what you talked about. But considering the fact that we only have an hour of session to talk with the users, it would be like really appreciated if we consider
Yeah.
guesstimates now and go
Yeah.
ahead with it. Okay, great.
Yeah. So let's quickly jump into the guesstimates piece. So very quickly, let me give you like a brief introduction on what guesstimates are. So guesstimates, like the name suggests, is a guess estimate. So what you normally are asked is, you are asked to say how many what is the market, I mean, what is the market size of say toothpastes in India, or how. And the reason why these consulting firms actually ask these questions is for two reasons. One is just to see how you approach the problem and how you're able to structure and segment your thinking. So they just want to see how you think and approach a problem. So it's a lot about your analytical ability and your ability to just structure and break down a problem. And the second is definitely to test your quantitative ability as well, because you're going to be dealing with numbers in a guesstimate. So these are the two primary reasons why consulting firms use guesstimates in interviews. And I can just quickly tell you that there are different types of guesstimates. So there are broadly two types. One is a conventional guesstimate and one is an unconventional one. So a conventional one is what comes more often in an interview, which is something like I was saying, that what is the market size of televisions in India? What is the market size of, say, number of pens sold in India? Those kind of things. So something which is like an industry specific problem or something to do with market, etc., is what is a conventional guesstimate. And unconventional ones can be, I'm sure a lot of you might have read things like how many tennis balls can fit inside a plane, uh, and how much how much water is wasted in a day, and those kind of things. So those kind of fall in an unconventional bucket. So these are the two broad types of guesstimates. And like I mentioned, the objective is to test your analytical ability. Now, if I have to quickly talk about how you solve a guesstimate, so let me just do this with like a quick example that I'll give you all. Is that, suppose the question is to what is the market size of, say, number of televisions sold in India. So here they are not looking for the exact number of televisions sold in India. More like they are just looking to see how you approach that problem and how close can you get to that actual answer, right? So that is the goal. So you are expected to break this problem down into 3-4 levels and then give an answer. So when I say when you have to break the problem down into 3-4 levels, so if you have to estimate the number of TVs sold in India, the first thing you would do is just try and think that where all are TVs sold. So TVs might be sold to different households, and TVs might be sold to different commercial places as well, right? And then you try and then deep dive into the next segment. So which is, if I have to estimate how many number of households actually own a television, then you look at how many households exist in India, which is a function of the number of people divided by number of people in a house. So that is the first level. Once you get the number of households, then you can probably see that people can only buy a television if they have certain amount of money. So that is the next level of filtering you can do. So it's just like this, wherein you try and just keep segmenting and breaking down the problem. So you do it at a household level, then you do it at an income level, you can do it at a rural urban level, and then you come to an answer, which is how many televisions are there. So this is broadly the approach that you use to solve a guesstimate. What I will quickly now do is probably just give you a few tips and tricks on how to approach guesstimates. So the first tip that is very, very important, and from personal experience, that is something that I would really like to share with you all, is that you should practice guesstimates definitely, but it is not an exam wherein that if you practice like 10,000 guesstimates, you are definitely going to like crack the interview or things like that. So just keep that in mind, that the point of practicing guesstimates is not to make sure that you have solved every possible guesstimate in the world. It is just to probably understand and just get a feel and look of things of how you're able to segment things, how you're able to structure problems, etc. So that is the only purpose of practicing. So please do not practice with the purpose that, oh, there are these many industries, I need to be able to do market size problems of all the industries in the world, I need to be solving 10 unconventional guesstimates a day. Please don't approach it like that. And you need to really approach it as a new problem. And in fact, you should be, I would consider myself really lucky in an interview if I got a problem that I have never done before. Because when it's something you've already done before, you're not thinking on the spot, or you're not doing any thinking and actually solving the problem, which is what the interviewer actually wants to see. Whereas you might just be going ruttoing the old approach that you might have done in a guesstimate you've earlier solved, right? So that is the first tip in terms of how you practice, etc. The second one would be, I follow this rule in solving estimates. It is called ISSAC. So I'll tell you what everything stands for. So I here is identify. So the first step to any guesstimate is you first identify the problem. You clarify the question with the interviewer and ask him that is what exactly you're supposed to solve. So for example, if you're asked a market sizing question of say number of toothpaste sold in India, market size can either mean the number of toothpaste sold in India or the revenue that the entire toothpaste industry earns. So you need to be very sure and clarify the entire objective of what the problem is. So that is the first step, which is identify. The second one is S, which is structure. So here, like I was mentioning, you need to be able to follow a top-down structure while doing your guesstimate. So basically, think of it like a funnel. So you go from like the population of India and you keep going to a narrower bucket wherein you eliminate people who don't buy a toothpaste, and you finally reach a number of people who actually buy a toothpaste. So by structure, you need to follow a funnel approach, which is go top down, and second, you need to be MECE. So MECE is something you will hear a lot in consulting and in consulting interviews. MECE basically means mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So by mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, that means that whenever you break a problem down to one level, you need to make sure that each bucket is mutually exclusive. So by mutually exclusive, what I mean is, if suppose I have to break the population of India into boys and girls, I know for a fact that no boy is a girl. Of course, you can account for the transgenders, etc. But otherwise, you like by mutually exclusive, one like someone from one bucket does not fit in another bucket. So very simply, if I classify India into rural and urban, nobody in the rural segment comes into the urban segment, and no one in the urban segment fits into the rural segment, right? So this is mutually exclusive. And collectively exhaustive means that by covering rural and urban, you cover the entire country. So these are the two aspects of structuring a problem, that at every level you need to be able to break it down into mutually exclusive buckets and also be able to cover the entire spectrum of the problem that you're solving. So this was the second S, which is structure. The third one is the segments. So here, this is another very important feature, is now you have to start segmenting the problem. Now, suppose you are looking at, let's take the toothpaste example itself, and suppose you break down India into a rural and an urban India, and rural India, as we know, is 70% of India's population. So when I say now we've broken them into two segments, you always approach the segment which is the larger segment. So this is also called the 820 rule, wherein you try and look at the biggest segments or the segments that have the most impact first. So which might actually be very important to your problem or to the number that you're going to get, right? So always when you're trying to solve a guesstimate, always try and look at the biggest segments first, and the smaller segments can be done later. The next part of the ISS AC framework is the A. By A here we mean assumptions. So while doing estimates, you need to be able to make certain assumptions to arrive at your final answer, because you don't have any access to data. You are just doing this on a piece of pen and paper. So if you have to say that, okay, you need to make an assumption, right, that only X% of rural India uses the toothpaste, because some people might still be using some form of, say, traditional herbal solutions and things like that. So you need to be like if I say that, okay, 80% of rural India uses toothpaste, so that is an assumption that I am making. So it's very crucial for you to make assumptions while doing a guesstimate, and the assumptions that you make need to be grounded with some logic or some reasoning. So like I said, why do I think that 80% of rural India uses toothpaste is because I think there is only a very small percentage of the population that cannot afford a toothpaste or is using some form of a rural alternative, right? So you need to be able to justify every assumption that you make. So if you're saying that only 10% of rural example, so why is that? Because people don't have that purchasing power. You might not have an Apple showroom in those rural areas, those kind of things. So just make sure that every assumption you make is backed in some form of logic and reasoning. And the final part of the framework is C, which is calculation. So here by calculation, like I said, it's a number-based problem, a guesstimate. So you need to be able to do math at every point in your guesstimate. And sometimes since you're dealing with things like market size, the numbers are going to like millions, billions, and lakhs, crores, etc. So there, it so happens that you might get confused with the zeros. You might make a quick calculation error and things like that. So it's very important to remember that you are not getting judged on your speed for math. You are just getting judged on how correct your calculations are. And again, you don't have to be accurate to the T. Like you don't have to say that India's market size is 3,542.66 crores. They want you to just arrive at an answer where it is around, you can approximate something to a 35 crores, or you're able to round off numbers, that is allowed, but just make sure that you're doing the calculations right and you're taking your time to do them. There is no hurry to do it. So this was the ISSAC framework that I find really useful to do the guesstimates, which is identify, structure, segment, assume, and calculate, right? So this was on the structure that I use for guesstimates. Now, maybe I can just quickly, in the next 10 minutes, run you through some small tips and tricks that have worked for me in my interviews, and then maybe we can do like another round of question answers. Right. So, like I said, the first thing was make sure that you're like understand the purpose of why you practice guesstimates. The second thing is just make sure that you're able to get the right numbers while you're doing the guesstimates. And okay, let me just quickly spend a couple of minutes talking about unconventional questions before we get into that. So there are a lot of unconventional problems that you might come across, right? And this here is where your practice comes into play. So say for example, you are asked for how many tennis balls can fit in a room, for example. So here it's just, you need to be able to segment the problem, that's all. So think about it, like a room, what is the volume of a room and what is the volume of a ball? And just see that there might be some certain spaces that might be in between some balls. So it's just a very simple mathematical problem. So just make sure that in an unconventional problem, like I can't really discuss and give you examples because there can be tons of unconventional problems that you will come up with, but you need to just be able to make sure that you're able to break down the problem. So every time an unconventional question is asked, you do not have to freak out or anything. You just need to be calm and just see, okay, how can I break this down further? Like, for example, if I was recently in an interview asked that how many swimming pools are there in Bangalore, for example. So the first level is just to understand where can you find swimming pools in Bangalore. So you can find swimming pools in apartments, you can find them at schools, you can find them in different clubs, and you can also find them like in public, if a government builds it in like municipal corporations, etc. So it's again like you first at a first level identify where all you can find swimming pools. Then you say, okay, let me pick the biggest segment where I think the most number of pools might lie, which probably may be apartments in a city like Bangalore. So then you dive into that segment. So even in unconventional questions, this same framework applies, which is the ISS AC. It might be slightly trickier because you don't have your traditional filters, which is income, rural, urban, age, etc. But it is the same way that you approach a conventional problem that you should try and approach an unconventional problem as well, which is just keep breaking down the problem at every level. Okay. So getting back to the different tips and tricks that we have, the first one, like I mentioned. So the next one I'd like to talk about is involving the interviewer. So, like a guesstimate people normally practice on their own, which is just writing a problem statement on a piece of paper and just solving it by yourself. However, in an interview, you should be solving it with the interviewer. You should involve the interviewer as much as you can. When I say this, I mean it's not an exam where you write the entire thing and you just present that paper to the interviewer, but you need to be at every step, you need to be communicating with that interviewer. So for example, when you first clarify the objective and then you take your first assumption, you ask the interviewer saying, I aim to take 30% of India can do this. Is that a fair assumption? I think it is because of ABCD. Then the interviewer gives his input over there. So you need to always keep the interviewer aligned while doing the guesstimate, because at the end of the guesstimate you do not want interviewer questioning an assumption you might have made right at the beginning, saying, why did you take this assumption? I don't think this makes sense. So you don't want to be caught in that kind of a spot. And also because it's an interview and you're making an impression, etc., you don't want to get that interviewer really bored as well. So you need to make interviewer in this entire process, right? The next tip that really works for me is just making sure that you go really slow and steady. You need to be able to think. So, like I said, it is never about getting to the answer first. It is always being able to derive a great approach and a nice logical approach, right? And it is okay for you to take a couple of minutes whenever you feel like to actually solve this. So, for example, if you're actually wanting to take some time at every level to break down a problem, you can always say, saying, can I take a couple of minutes to break this further? Or can I take a couple of minutes for this? And the interviewer will, of course, say yes. And so you don't really have to worry. So at every step, just please feel free to take your time and just be able to think really well and calmly, so you're able to actually do a great segmentation of a problem, right? The next one is just be sure of all the basic stats that you need to know. So, for example, know things like India's population, India's rural-urban split, India's income split, things like poverty line, etc. So, those kind of things you can just probably brush up. But of course, you're not expected to know every stat in the world, which is the point of a guesstimate, is how close you are to the actual number. So don't worry too much, but just keep some of these basic stats at the back of your head, right? And the next one is just that you need to be able to, like, normally, say if I give a guesstimate, which is like number of toothpaste in India, like you and I might be able to do it in pretty much the same filters, right? Which is income, age, rural, urban, etc., etc. But now an interviewer also has to pick a person to join the firm, and if two people are doing it the same way, how does he decide who to pick? So it is very important for you to be able to, in every guesstimate, think of a particular nuance or a particular different or like a creative insight that probably someone else might not have been able to. So just to contextualize this, so I once had a guesstimate where I was supposed to estimate the number of mosquito repellents that are sold. And one really very small nuance that I was able to bring out, which really impressed the interviewer, was that I live in an apartment on the 8th floor, and I know for a fact that mosquitoes can't fly that high. So we don't really need mosquito repellents. So I was just able to bring out that nuance, saying that I can eliminate a greater number of population because people living in apartments above a certain height might not need mosquito repellents. Right? So this is an example of being able to give like a nuanced insight or something they're able to draw on from your personal experience is something that interviewers really, really like. So whenever you're solving a guesstimate, instead of using a very templatized approach, just see at every point in time, is there something you're able to add to that guesstimate that someone else might not be able to do as well, right? So that is a creative nuance. And just another tip is that I, for a fact, used to get very confused while with the zeros while doing a guesstimate. So something that I really picked up was always, if it was a lakh or a crore or something, I always used to write the number into 10 to the power 5 and leave the zeros till the end to just multiply. So I never bothered with the zeros throughout the guesstimates, and I always put it as a into 10 to the power 5 for lakhs, 7 for crores, 6 for millions, however the problem was being approached. And only at the last stage, when I had to give a final answer, would I just add the powers of all the zeros and just give a proper answer that it's X lakh rupees or X lakh crores or whatever. So if some of you might be getting really confused on things like a very small point, like how many zeros or things like math, like these small tricks are really, really helpful. And one final thing is, this doesn't happen too often in interviews, but it is always very good to do a basic sense check of a guesstimate that you might have actually solved. So it is called a sanity check in a lot of places. So if you say arrive at a number that India sells around the revenue of the toothpaste industry is say 5,000 crores, you need to be able to contextualize that, okay, is it possible for India's toothpaste industry to actually give 5,000 crores in a year? So think of if whether that makes sense, right? So thing and ways to do that is like compare it to say in India's GDP and see that, okay, like India's GDP say $2 trillion, and if I'm saying that India's toothpaste industry, if I come up with an answer saying that it's $1 trillion, like India's toothpaste industry in no way can contribute to 50% of India's GDP, right? So things like that. Okay, so I think there is some amount of people want me to quickly do a live guesstimate. So I will just very quickly, and it's really hard for me to do it because we are doing this on audio and not with on a blackboard. But if I have to quickly solve a guesstimate for you all, I'll just pick something that I was asked for in one of my interviews during my consulting prep was how many, what are the number of DTH sold in India in a year? And DTH is the television connection that all of you probably might have. So the way I approached this problem was I first clarified whether it was I had to find out the number of DTHs sold in India or the revenue of the DTHs sold in India, and it was the number of DTHs sold, right? So to find out the number of DTH sets sold in India in a year, the first step is to break it into a household level and a commercial angle. Because think about it, a DTH is not something an individual would buy, right? It is something a household would buy or something like a corporate this thing would buy. So that was the first level of structuring that I did. That is, break it into this, then go deeper down each segment and funnel it out that way. And here, in terms of priority, I aligned with my interviewer that we should look at the household segment first, and he agreed. So a lot of guesstimates, they might want you to just look at one segment and not look at the other segment as well, because one segment might be really, really big. So we looked at households first, and when we looked at households, we first identified how many households are there in India. So which was 1.2 billion divided by 5 people in a household, I guess. So we came with a 240 million households in India, and then we did a segmentation of rural and urban households, which is a 70-30 split, right, in India. And uh, we broke it down that way. So then I said, okay, let's look at the rural segment first, because that is the bigger bulk of the Indian population. And then we said, okay, fine, let's do the 240 million and 70% of that, which comes up to around, say, 168, so say 170 million households. So now another, like, I'm just giving you a tip as I think of it, is now you look to solve this entire rural segment first and then go to the urban segment. So you do a vertical funnel down of the rural and then you do a vertical funnel down of the urban. So now I have 170 million rural households, and then now I do an income split. So now how do I do an income split here is I need to first eliminate how many people might not even have a DTH, right? So that is, I need to be able to find those households. And why will people not buy a DTH is primarily because they don't have the income to do so, right? Now the second bucket here would be people who have one DTH in their house. And the third bucket would be the very rich people who might have more than one DTH connection in the house, right? So now think about it. Now how would you solve this level of a problem, which is where you have to break this into three buckets, which is no DTH, one DTH, and one plus DTH, which is say two in this case, right? So now the way I always used to contextualize this problem is that, okay, how much might a DTH connection cost you per month or per year? And say it comes out around 2,000-3,000 rupees if I'm not wrong. So I don't think someone earning, like a household earning, say less than say 30,000 rupees a month would be able to afford a DTH. So that percent, how much percent of that of India's rural population might be in that? Say maybe 30 odd percent. So I'm able to eliminate that 30%, right? So after I eliminate that 30%, then I say that the remaining only people above, say, earning like say 3 lakh or 4 lakh rupees a month will have a really huge house and might actually need two DTH connections. So that might be only the top 10% of rural India, and the remaining 60% falls into the segment of one DTH in India, right? So this is how I solve the problem and get to the number of how many DTHs are sold in rural India per year, right? How many DTH connections are there? Uh, and yeah, I just read a question that should we not clarify by doing a demand side approach versus supply side approach. So that's a good question, but so most of the market sizing questions are normally approached in a demand side situation. It is of course helpful to clarify with an interviewer about whether you should take a supply side approach, but that is only followed in segments where it is really hard to probably break it from a demand side point of view. But a demand side approach is always easier and always more advisable to do, right? So this was a quick example of a guesstimate. Maybe now let me just scroll up the chat and just talk about. Let me just answer a few of the questions that have come up. Yeah. How to decide the degree of segmentation. So I think a rule of thumb is just make sure in a guesstimate you have the first way to look at it is you should be able to eliminate all the people who don't use a product or like it do not figure into your problem statement. So you need to be able to do those many level of segmentations which are necessary to eliminate a certain amount of critical mass that is not using that particular product or whatever, those kind of things. Second is generally from an interview context, you probably do, I think, 4 levels of segmentation at max and not more than that. That helps you solve your problem. So that's the first one. Second one is think how to approach the second part in this television, suppose TVs in corporates, hotels, offices, etc. So here, if you're looking at a commercial segment, the first way to break it down is to see where all do you actually see a television. So do it in a very messy way. So you might see it in offices, you might see it in hotels, you might see it in hospitals, and the list is never ending. But you need to be able to cover like a broad 80 or using that 80-20 rule. Just make sure you're able to cover most of the big buckets where you might actually find a TV. Like it's okay if you miss a very small segment that might give you an additional 1,000 TVs a year. So that's okay. And then you might be asked to deep dive into, say, the first one, which is, say, a hotel. So then you try and estimate how many hotels are there in India and how many rooms are there in India, and then find that those many number of TVs might exist. So that is how I would approach that. Non-conventional questions we addressed. We've done a like estimate. Recall my interview experience. So, like I said, most of the tips that I've given are things from my interview experience that either me or my friends have experienced, which is just make sure that you're not talking without thinking. It's okay to take your time and do it really slowly, but just make sure your numbers are right. And just make sure that always keep the lens in your mind that if someone else solved the guesstimate, he would have done it the exact same way. What additional value add am I able to do? What other insight am I able to give the interviewer? And how can I personalize the guesstimate to include some of my personal experiences and those kind of things? So that really, really helps. How did my CFA journey help? To be honest, I had only given, I think, a couple of levels before I gave my consulting. I'd given only one level of my CFA before my consulting interview. So I wouldn't really say it helped me in the interview prep, but definitely in the broader context, just being able to understand in consulting, it's helped me a lot because you deal a lot with like the financial statements of a company, right? So just being able to understand it, being able to understand different numbers and things like that. So it's really helped me in that part of consulting, but maybe not too much in my interview prep per se. I'm sorry, I don't probably get this question, which is just in case we know the exact answer of a guesstimate, what should we do? As in, due to general knowledge, you may know a particular fact. Fair enough. So just always do one thing that, say, it's very hard for this kind of a situation to arise, and if somehow does, just keep that at the back of your head just for a sanity check number. Do not in any way try to solve your guesstimate to arrive at that number. Of course, you might arrive at a different number, but just make sure that that number is not affecting the way you're approaching the problem. Like, try and always have a clean slate while solving any problem. So just make sure that this doesn't affect your approach. How much time do we roughly have to solve a guesstimate question on average before it feels we're taking too long? It is around an interview, guesstimate interview would take you, say, around 25 to 30 odd minutes. So that is on average how much time it will take. Does CFA help consultants? Yes, maybe not too relevant to consulting, but I feel personally that it has helped me in the way I'm able to understand a few of the industry nuances, the way I'm able to understand a few financial statements, etc. Not too relevant. You can, of course, pick those up on the job in consulting. They help you through different trainings as well. But yeah, this is a small edge. And I also was able to take advantage of this because in a recent case, I did a piece which is very heavy on financial modeling. So the CFA angle really did help me out there. But not being a CFA or not knowing finance does not in any way disadvantage you in consulting. Like I said, you need not have any skill when you join consulting. It's just how quickly you can pick up new skills. Is consulting a good opportunity for finance students? Definitely it is a good opportunity. I'll tell you. So consulting is a great opportunity for, I think, a few reasons. One is that just the fact that a lot of people maybe are unsure of what industry they want to get into. So just being able to get a different hang of industries at such a young age, etc., is very useful in consulting. Second is just the fact that consulting, because of its very fast-paced nature, has a very steep learning curve. So because you're interacting with CEOs on a day-to-day basis, you're doing a lot of problem solving, very heavy problem solving, and you're developing a toolkit of understanding an industry in a very short span of time. You also develop to learn things really, really quickly, which is a skill that you take around anywhere you go. And third is consulting is a great exit opportunity and can literally open doors for you to any B school, to any job that you might want to do. So, which is why consulting is really, really helpful, I think. And to contextualize the finance part of it, I know, like, so BCG hires, go like every time the CA results come out, CA finals, BCG specifically hires CAs as well. And a lot of CAs, in fact, are a part of BCG. So I don't think a finance student should not do consulting, and in fact, would recommend you to do consulting. Tentatively, how early should one start prepping for cases and guesstimates? So, like I said, the question is not how much you can do, but the question is just for you to be able to comfortably just get a hang of how things work. So probably a month or so before placements is what the trend used to be in undergrad during our days, and that's what most of us followed, wherein we did a lot of practice probably 4-5 weeks before our interview started. So that can you take one more session on solving cases, unconventional cases or market entry? Sure, I think Harry is the better person to ask to answer that, but definitely would be more than happy to do so. Can you highlight a bit more on sanity check and a few more methods you would use, like percentage of GDP? So this is a very interesting question. So the percentage of GDP is one way you're able to look at something. Then the second is, if by any chance you know a market cap of a company, say suppose market cap of Colgate is a large, like Colgate India is say 2,000 crore rupees, and you're able to arrive at a 5,000 for the industry, which says Colgate will have say 40%, and that broadly makes sense, right? So another way to do it is see if you know, if by any chance you know any of these numbers of market caps of industries, etc. So you're able to contextualize that as well. And just think of other sanity check approaches. So GDP, market cap. I think broadly it's this is, and it very dependent on the problem that you're solving. So it'll be very hard for me to just off the top of my head be able to tell you more. But these are the two that broadly work in most of the market sizing problems, at least. Is it important to let the interviewer know your chain of thought by speaking them out while solving the estimate? Definitely. It very good question. And like I mentioned, it is very important to keep your interviewer aligned. So at the beginning of the interview, you try and align the entire approach, saying, I first plan to look at the households, and I plan to segment it by rural, urban, and then I plan to segment it by income. This is the broad approach I plan to follow. Is this fine? He might just say no and say that he might want to take you down a different path and confuse you and say, no, do it the other way or do it this way. So you might have that conversation, but definitely you need to be able to align every part of the thought process with the interviewer, and like I said, communicate every part of it, because he's able to judge based on only what you communicate, right? Next question, tentatively, how early? I set 4 to 5 weeks like I mentioned for an interviewer. If we don't have interest in finance, should I look for consulting or Big Four? I would be slightly more biased towards consulting. At an MBB would definitely be a great opportunity for you to pursue. Is there any way non-IIT engineers can enter BCS consultants if they have the required skills? I don't think I am the best person to answer that, because definitely like you can send your CVs and stuff. I don't think there is a templatized approach on how to enter a consulting firm. Like from campus, of course, it is just the IITs, SRCCs, and maybe a few B schools. But laterally as well, if depending on your work experience, etc., people do end up joining BCG. Off-campus interviews are not that common for undergraduates. Off-campus interviews are more common for postgraduates. And if you're really focused on getting into an MBB and are not in a DU or an IIT, etc., I think the most preferable step would be to try and go to an IIM or an XLRI or an ISB, etc., which are B schools that BCG or any consulting firm heavily recruits from. Any particular resources or websites for interview prep? Yes. So I'll tell you a few good resources that we refer to. One is Case Interviews Cracked by the IIT Bombay folks, which is really a really great book. So one is Case Interviews Cracked. Second is called Day One, which is by people from IIT Madras. Third is this person called Victor Cheng has a great set of videos on very basic how to approach case solving. And fourth would be, I think, Case in Point is a nice starting point as well. So these are the four resources or books, websites that we used. And post that, it's a lot that you solve with your buddies, which are allotted when you're interviewing at a consulting firm. Do consulting firms conduct any competitions involving basic problem solving? I'm not too sure. Like BCG did do a couple of they collaborated with a Sriram case study competition in a business conclave, but it's not something that we actually do. It just happened to happen that year. But yeah, I think I have covered all the questions here, but and we're also almost done. So if you all have any more questions, please reach out to me offline. I think